Hi, everyone. Welcome back to On the Line. I'm Alicia Menendez. Calls are growing for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to lose his job over horrific conditions facing our service members aboard the USS Lincoln. The aircraft carrier has set a modern-day record for consecutive days at sea and has been deployed for nearly 9 months as part of President Trump's war of choice with Iran. Democratic Senate Leader Chuck Schumer says Hegseth must be fired immediately, and he is not alone. Here's what else we've heard, including from Congressman and veteran Jake Auchincloss on this show just yesterday. You have repeatedly called on Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to resign if Democrats are to take back control of Congress. Will impeachment be a priority?
Yes, it should be. Absolutely. We need an inquiry. We need oversight and investigations. And if the facts yield an impeachment recommendation, we need to pursue that vigorously.
We on the Armed Services Committee want basic answers.
He doesn't want there to be any accountability. He doesn't want to get blamed. That's pretty obvious. He doesn't want this president to get blamed.
MS Now has reported on the absolute grim conditions our service members are facing on that ship. Moldy showers, food shortages, running out of toothpaste, deodorant, and soap. This is what our service members, people who are putting their lives on the line for us, are dealing with, and it is taking a toll. A sailor jumped overboard last week and was in water for about an hour before being rescued. The sailor's wife told MS Now that days earlier her husband texted her, quote, "I think the boat is finally getting to me, and I really don't think I can keep up my Peace Act anymore." Hegseth was asked about the dire moment for our service members. Take a listen.
Completely misrepresented. Listen, we make sure that every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment. Some deployments are longer than others, and I have more respect and gratitude for those sailors than anybody.
With the health and dignity of our troops on the line, I want to bring in MS Now reporter Priya Sridhar, who has been doing that incredible reporting for us. Vaughn Hilliard is still with us. I also want to bring in Amy McGrath, retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel and the founder of Democratic Majority Action PAC, and MS Now political analyst Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark podcast. Amy, what we just heard there from Secretary Hegseth, is that sufficient?
No, because nobody trusts Secretary Hegseth. He has an integrity problem. He's had that from the start. Look, there's always stresses of being on deployment, and the longer the tour, the harder it becomes. I think the conditions of being in a combat zone for such a long period of time during these conditions makes it very, very difficult for those sailors that are out there. Sailors, soldiers, and Marines enduring harsh conditions, frankly, is not new. What is new and what stands out to me is the anger and sense of betrayal that these sailors and their families feel about the mission itself. I don't ever remember seeing this level of pushback from military family members during our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq even. Families who are normally very supportive are they're questioning why their loved ones are being put at risk. What's the strategy? Why do we need to start this war? Do we have competent leaders at the top who have prepared our forces for a long-term battle? Because frankly, many of these service members were probably told, like the American people, that this campaign was only going to last a few weeks.
I mean, Tim, to the point that Amy's making, this is about a ship the way that Moby Dick is about a whale. The administration has not given these service members a clear rationale for why they are there in the first place. DOD isn't just responsible for the conditions of the ship. They are responsible for why these service members have been deployed. And that's the part, it seems to me, that Hegseth can't really contend with.
Yeah, there's no strategy. I mean, there's no exit plan. I was talking with Adam Kinzinger on the Bulwark yesterday, and he's like, look, maybe this would be different if it's like, hey, at Labor Day, we're going to rotate you guys out and we've got a plan to get a new carrier. There's none of that. Like, they have no strategy. They have no plan. The war was not pitched to anyone. It wasn't pitched to the American people, but it wasn't pitched to the, sailors, soldiers, airmen. Like, it was a completely ill thought out, stupid decision from the president on a whim because he thought it was going to be easy. He thought it was going to last a weekend. And here we are. And these sailors have been out there for 250 days. I mean, the usual kind of rotation where you at least go to port, and is every 30 to 45 days. This is way, way, way beyond that. So it's no surprise that the morale is low, and especially when there's no end in sight.
Right. And Priya, this is capturing the attention of members of Congress. California Senator Adam Schiff, who is from the same state as this ship, spoke about the conditions with our colleague, Peter Alexander. Take a listen to what they said.
We've had, I know, at least one family of someone aboard interact with our office and complain about the lack of food and the poor quality of food, saying that was certainly in terrible shape. And that was early on. So I can only imagine months later how much worse it is now.
Priya, we highlighted your reporting speaking to the wife of that sailor who jumped overboard. What else did she say to you about what's been going on there?
Yeah, that's right, Alicia. It was an absolutely heartbreaking story. This young woman is just 19 years old. She actually had a baby girl back in February while her husband was on this deployment. He actually got an opportunity to meet that baby for the first time before he was admitted to Balboa Naval Medical Center in San Diego after he was medically evacuated from the ship after he jumped overboard last Monday. She told me she wasn't entirely surprised that this happened because he had been expressing to her repeatedly during this deployment that he was exhausted. He was an aviation mechanic who worked on the aircraft carrier's flight deck, and he also expressed concerns about safety conditions there because he said that his prescription contact lenses had expired, and he expressed both of his mental health concerns and those safety concerns to his chain of command, she says, and to the ship's medical team, and she says that they just brushed it off. And what was even more concerning, Alicia, is she tells me that after she discovered his suicide attempt from one of his squadron mates back on Monday, she reached out to the Navy to find out more information, and they did not get back to her about anything until Friday, 5 days later. So yet again, it just shows a little bit of a lack of transparency here. And this is just one sailor's story of the 5,000 sailors who are on that aircraft carrier.
There can be a political shift, the attention necessary. You have a growing number of Democrats who are calling for Hegseth to either be fired or have raised the possibility of impeachment. At the same time, you've got political reporting. The Democratic candidates have made Hegseth a new boogeyman on the campaign trail. They're planning to shift their attacks from President Trump to Hegseth. I wonder sort of what you think about that strategy and what type of pressure it would take for the attention to really turn to Hegseth and his leadership. Amy, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I think Hegseth should be a political target for Democrats because he is so incompetent. And it is putting our military at risk. It's putting our country at risk. I mean, his treatment of the military from the start has been terrible. You can talk about all the silly stuff, like the pulling down photos of diversity in the force or the ridiculous dressing down of the top military officers last year, the admirals and generals that he has not promoted because of their color or gender. But the biggest problem with Pete Hegseth is his incompetence and his lack of integrity. The military doesn't need to be coddled, doesn't need to be treated well even. But what the military needs is a Secretary of Defense who is competent at the top, who is going to make sure that he does the things that only the Secretary of Defense can do, like partnerships and making sure we don't get into a war where we are going to get clobbered strategically. Those are the big things. And the integrity piece is so important. This is a man who has lied about the Strait of Hormuz being open. He's lied about the operation. He's encouraged the military to perform war crimes. He's covered up the casualties of this war. People just don't believe him anymore, and that's why he needs to go.
Right, and Vaughn, what we're hearing from Amy's analysis is so fundamentally different from what we're hearing from President Trump, who's continued to support Hegseth publicly, says he has faith in him. Just take a listen.
The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and he's had some good victories lately, I will tell you. He's going to have a lot more. Pete Hegseth, incredible. We have just a great group of people. Pete Hegseth, who was born for this role. I mean, he's doing a great job.
Okay, but fuller context here. You have the reporting that Trump's frustration with the Iran war boiled over at last week's Camp David summit, where he demanded answers on munition shortages. Hegseth was aboard that special decoy flight out of the Middle East, though unlike Trump, he did not sneak aboard. Why this enduring loyalty to Hegseth on the part of the president?
Pete Hegseth is still, Alicia, carrying out the orders of the president himself. This is a war that the president of the United States decided to go forward with and commanded his Pentagon to move forward with these offensive strikes on February 28th. This is something that Donald Trump has suggested would be able to be negotiated, and yet every step of the way, the fault of the continuousness of the war has not been the strategy in his mind, but it is the difficulty that is the Iranians' ability to maintain its offensive posture in keeping this war going. And I think that it goes back to people like Mark Esper and James Mattis from the first Trump administration, and the commitment by the transition team this go around to install people into these cabinet positions that would be unyieldingly loyal to him and his wishes. And that's exactly what he got in November of 2024 when he selected Pete Hegseth, right? He made it through narrowly through the confirmation process despite deep reservations from people like veteran Joni Ernst. And so in so many ways, what we're watching transpire now, the president really can't lay at the feet of Pete Hegseth. And I think that is where the reporting from Priya and from our colleague Lindsay are so relevant to this moment, because it's the human impact stories that are the ones that are hardest to spin. And understanding that soldiers are not in the position to speak out, and their family members are hesitant to do so as well, knowing the potential implications of an administration that has gone after individuals that they deem leakers or individuals who they deem to be seeking to undermine the mission of the American military. We saw them pull the national security credentials from the former Air Force secretary that served under the Biden administration for simply talking with the New York Times on the record about questions as it related to the new Air Force One. And so we have seen this Pentagon and this administration go after Alyssa Slotkin, go after Mark Kelly. And so there has been a very clear statement that has been made by Pete Hegseth on behalf of the president that they are willing to go after anybody that tries to undermine the mission of the U.S. military. And so for right now, he's a pretty good option that continues to exist despite the frustrations of the continuing war.
Tim, who is the bigger risk for Hegseth, the president growing frustrated with him or Democrats seeking to impeach him?
The president. And, look, I think there are a couple of ways to look at why there is not more buzz about moving on from Pete Hegseth around MAGA circles. It's not as if they have not been willing to push aside people in this cabinet who have not performed well. It has tended to all be women, is something that I guess would be noteworthy, whether that be Kristi Noem or Tulsi Gabbard or Pam Bondi. So the administration and Trump himself has moved on from people. So the fact that he's not, given just the plain failures that anybody who has eyes can see, leads you to wonder a couple of things. I mean, maybe it's as simple as Vaughn was saying. Pete Hegseth is just carrying out Trump's orders, and for Trump to move on from Hegseth would be for Trump to look inside himself and talk about his own and reflect on his own mistakes, which is not something that Donald Trump does. So maybe it's as simple as that. I think a more ominous potential that we should at least think about is, I think the other person I would look at who's extremely incompetent, who is staying in this administration despite tons of terrible press, is Kash Patel. And maybe Donald Trump has decided he wants pliable, less than competent people in those roles, given what might happen in the coming years. I think maybe he looks back at the way that Mark Esper did not accede to his demands about shooting protesters in the leg, or the Insurrection Act at the end of his first term, and think he doesn't want someone like that in there. And he'd rather have somebody incompetent and pliable. I think that is also a real possibility.